Hello, I'm Libby Hathorn, author and poet. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts and the Tonkinilly Centre for this opportunity to talk about the whole range of my books here today. Now, I write for very little kids, I write for emerging readers, also for young adults, and indeed for adults, poetry and short stories for adults. But I thought I'd start today with looking at my very latest books. So here we've got my picture book, Butterfly, We're Expecting You, which is a beautiful little poem. I think it's beautiful because it's based on a wonderful poet, an American poet who wrote a poem called Bee, We're Expecting You, sitting with my little grandchild. She saw a bird's feather, then a bird. She heard a frog croak and then saw a frog. And I was filled with the wonder of how little kids see everything around them with such clear eyes. And look, it can be said of my last two, which were last year and the year before, Incredibilia and Outside. Again, it's about the five senses and the wonder of nature around us everywhere. I'm trying to say that message that really in a way doesn't need to be said to kids as much as it needs to be said to parents and adults. Now this one, Outside's going to be made an opera, and that will be a fine thing with the beautiful music of Eleanor Katz-Chernin. So picture books, very important to me to enter into the world of childhood with that enthralling curiosity and that innocence, which I think is, very important to nurture. So we need to expose them to a lot of singingness in the poetry and in the texts they read when they're very young, and then, really vitalise imagination with books that allow them to imagine. So poetry's really, really important. Here I've put together a collection of good old Australian poems that range from very early poets like Dorothea McKellar or Henry Lawson, right through to modern ones like Dorothy Porter and poets alive and with us today, which is wonderful. And it follows the trajectory of a river. So the beginnings, I've got a lot of Aboriginal beautiful poems about the beginnings of life and the joy of Aboriginal words. Goes right through across the land, so you might have the man from Snowy River as we go across the country to the mountains, then to the sea, beautiful sea poems, and finally that existential longing we feel staring out at the sea as the river meets the sea. So these are poems that I work a lot with children and with teachers. Behind that book's one equally important, a book I put together with Rachel Bailey, which is about women and their work. And this was an extraordinary project because we were flooded with so many poems that women want to talk about and write poems, from poets who've never been published to the likes of Judith Beveridge, our most honoured Australian poet. Then I should turn to my most recent novel. I'm working on a novel called Asylum at the moment, which is filling my head. But before that, for 4 years, my Anzac novel, Eventual Poppy Day, filled my head. My mother had a brother that I found out very late was an Anzac. She was a baby when he went off to war. He was revered in our family. We never knew him because he died at 20 years of age at the Battle of the Somme. But the stories my mother told, my grandmother told, filled me with my own curiosity, so that I finally got his papers, read through them, and based a whole novel on a contemporary boy and 100 years ago a young boy going off to war, which he thought would be over in a few months, and of course sadly wasn't. Other novels include I suppose my bestseller, I should sort of talk about that, Thunderwith, was made this film, a movie, The Echo of Thunder, by the Hallmark Hall of Fame, and it's a love affair with the Australian bush. When it was being edited, I remember one of the editors saying, there's too much description of the bush. And I said, but in this book, the bush is a character as far as I'm concerned. And so that was allowed to stay. And an historic novel, Georgiana, Woman of Flowers. She was our first Australian botanist, taken to West Australia with her husband, living in a place where they had to build with their hands their own house. But this amazing woman had the foresight or the insight to see the beauty of Australian flowers and sent them back to England, the first a site for some of the English and Kew Gardens of the wonder of Australian plants. So that's a book that I think resonates with this passion for flowers that she had. Another one that's, these defy time, some of these books. Thunderwith's in print about, I've got to say about 30 years. This is about 20 years. And you might be interested to hear that it garnered really bad reviews in Australia, but in America, fabulous reviews, and in England, even better. And it won the Kate Greenaway Medal in the United Kingdom for the beautiful illustrations by Gregory Rogers, and won a Parent's Choice in America. So it was very odd that in Australia, it didn't really seem to capture the attention that it did overseas. But I'm so thrilled to say it does today. It is studied in many universities and schools and remains in print. Now that's a long time for an Australian book to be in print, 20 years. So I'm thrilled about that. This one, by the way, is linked to that. It's funny, I had done with World War I, and then a voice spoke to me. It was a soldier with a dog in the Somme at the back of the lines, who then met a little French boy. Now I wanted it to go away, but I saw a picture at the State Library of a man, a soldier coming back, opening a sack as he got off the boat, and out of the sack was stepping a boy. It's a true story, a French boy that he brought back. Imagine that. So then I knew I had to write a soldier, a dog and a boy, which I've got to say has just won the AWGIE Literary Award, which is really important to me because it's for someone who writes on the theme of peace, and that is my big message, peace. Well, now I'd like to, having shown you a quick tour of my books, to talk to those of you who are keen to write. And I've got a few words to say about respecting your own ideas. You might think it's all been said before, but look, the English language is full of a finite number of words, and yet, year after year, there are new ways of saying the same thing, or fresh new things through poetry. So always respect your own ideas. Don't think someone else's are better. I think gaining the confidence, what I'd say to you if you want to write, set aside a place. Give yourself the dignity of time. It's really important that you value yourself as the writer and start to call yourself a writer. Then, if you can, mix in the milieu of writers. Try and find other young writers or beginning writers of any age and mix with them, sharing your ideas and your doubts. Of course you're assailed with doubts first of all, and it's a competitive place to be. But it's very important, as I say, to feel confidence in yourself that you have something worth saying. Without that, I never would have written any of these books.